one example with two different cases I can give you. So we've looked, for example, in the North End here in Boston, there's a wonderful Coast Guard cutter base where they have a lot of things, but among other stuff there, they have 3 270-foot medium endurance cutters that we are very fortunate to be able to work with the crews on those ships. They're a very dedicated group of maintainers and operators of that equipment for the Coast Guard, and it's just spectacular base to be near. Those ships are kind of like the B-52 of the Coast Guard. They've been around a long time. I forget exactly, but I think the mechs, they call them medium endurance cutters, I think were made in the 70s, believe it or not, and they likely are to be operating until at least the 2030s. And when you go look at them, one thing that we've looked at is the ventilation system. So there are pipes that bring air all over the ship, and one way that they do the ventilation is that there's an inline pipe, so there's a pipe in line with all the other blowing stuff, and in that pipe is a motor, and that motor is connected to a fan that turns inside the pipe. And that section of pipe is mounted with rubber mounts to the deck. And all sorts of things happen. So the fan blades can get fouled. If they get fouled, especially if they get fouled asymmetrically, so if I had fan blades, but one of them isn't the same anymore because it's got junk in it or something, that may cause a vibrational imbalance as the thing turns. But the other thing that can happen that's completely different, but also a problem, is the rubber mounts that the thing sits on fail. And that's normal. You know, they just go after a certain amount of time, they lose their elasticity, their stiffness changes, and they basically turn to powder. And that's known, and it's a constant thing that has to be checked, but it's not always something that you are able to keep up with perfectly. And so what happens is Vampire is able to look at that fan, and for example, during a spin down, when they turn off the fan, it's able to tell the difference between vibration that's due to fouling of the fan blades and vibration that's due to the changing in the motor mounts. And we can report back on that and say, okay, your rubber mounts are failing. And it's not so bad yet. And we may or may not be able to say, this is where the research is, you know, how long have you got? So I don't exactly say that yet. But we try. In other words, we're working with them to be able to say, well, this is definitely different than yesterday, and you may want to take a look at it, and we're pretty sure it's due to this, not that, is the kind of information we try to give them. And that's a real example. In other words, that particular ventilation fan on the cutter is one that we've spent a lot of time with helping them find, on several of their ships, actually, also in California on the national security cutters. It's the same general situation. The ships are more modern, but the fan, that type of coaxial pipe fan, is still used there. It is incredibly beneficial to be able to look at the system when the speed is changing. When the speed is not changing, when it's running at its constant operating point, as I said, that's when it's been designed, and when somebody put in a lot of effort making sure that the thing was going to be happy at that operating speed. Now, it may not stay happy at that operating speed, but it's not probably hard to imagine that at its operating speed, that's where it's best armored up to do a good job trying to hide from you any problems it's having. Obviously, if it's a disaster and the thing's just falling apart, it's going to have problems at any operating speed. But if we're looking for the subtle indications before things really turn into just a complete wheels off the cart disaster, one argument that we found may be true is it really doesn't want to show you that it's not feeling well when it's running normally. That spin down is a chance to kind of probe it when it's sort of off the football field and kind of collapsing on the bench, if you follow me. That's when you get to hear the groans, and if you'll accept an analogy, you get to hear the groans and the sort of crunching as it sits down, if that makes any sense. And it's not the only piece of information you might want, but it is a very interesting one that people don't look at nearly as much as they might want.